The Vorkai species had a saying, loosely translated, that went something like this: if a creature screams in the void and no one hears it, was the creature ever worth hearing? For 400 years, the Vorkai Council repeated that phrase every time someone mentioned the small blue planet in the Sector 9 expanse. The planet with the loud radio signals, the planet with the creatures who kept launching tin cans into orbit and calling it space exploration, the planet with the beings who had at last count invented 17 different ways to cook a potato and somehow considered that an achievement worth celebrating. Earth? Humans? Homo sapiens? Oh yes. The Vorkai knew about them. Every advanced civilization in the Galactic Compact knew about them. They were, to put it politely, the galaxy's most enthusiastically ignored species. And the Vorkai? Well, the Vorkai were the ones who had built the Ignore protocol in the first place. Fleet Commander Doris Vell stood at the observation bridge of the Vorkai warship Undying Verdict, watching the starfield drift past like a slow river of cold fire. He was tall, even by Vorkai standards, with 4 articulated arms folded neatly across his chest and 2 amber compound eyes scanning the navigational display in front of him. His crest, the bioluminescent ridge running from his forehead to the base of his skull, was pulsing a bored, dim gray. Commander? His second-in-command, a younger officer named Prace Dole, approached from the left side of the bridge. We are receiving an updated report from Survey Probe 14. Is it anything interesting? Doris Vell asked, in a tone that made it perfectly clear he expected the answer to be no. Prace Dole hesitated. That hesitation, small and barely noticeable to most species, was, for a Vorkai, the equivalent of screaming. Doris Vell slowly turned both amber eyes toward his second-in-command. Prace, sir, the probe has detected a ship. We travel through space. There are many ships. Yes, sir, but this one. Another hesitation. The crest on Prace Dole's head flickered orange for half a second before the young officer visibly suppressed it. This one is of Vorkai origin, cargo class, registered to the Dolkire Trading Fleet, Sector 9 route. It disappeared 11 cycles ago, sir, with 42 crew aboard. Doris Vell was very still for a long moment, and the probe found it. Yes, where? There it was. Another pause. Longer this time. Prace Dole pulled up the navigational coordinates on the shared display, and Doris Vell looked at them, and then he looked away, and then very slowly he looked back at them. That is inside the human quarantine zone, Doris Vell said. Yes, sir. The zone that the Galactic Compact put in place to prevent any advanced species from making contact with a pre-warp civilization. Yes, sir. The zone that my career has been spent enforcing. Yes, sir. Doris Vell turned back to the starfield. His crest pulsed a very slow, very resigned shade of purple. How? He asked, with the infinite patience of a being who already knew the answer was going to be absurd. Did a Vorkai cargo vessel end up inside the human quarantine zone? The answer, as it turned out, involved a navigational malfunction, an unlicensed smuggling detour, 17 crates of contraband Kilori spice, a microgravity storm that the Compact's weather monitoring had technically logged but not prioritized, and a pilot who had, at the time of the accident, been asleep. The crew of 42 had survived the crash. Barely. The ship had gone down on the northern continent of the third planet, in a region the humans called, with their typical geographic poetry, Northern Canada. And there they had been for 11 cycles, stranded on a pre-warp planet, forbidden by every law the Compact had written from making contact with the native population, slowly running out of food, power, and what Doris Vell could only describe as the will to continue existing. The Undying Verdict broke orbit around a dead moon at the edge of Sector 9 and set a course for Earth. We go in quiet, Doris Vell told his bridge crew, with a tone that brooked absolutely zero argument. No active sensors, no weapons hot. We retrieve our people and we leave. The humans will not know we were there. This is a medical recovery operation, not a first contact event. His crew said yes, sir, in crisp unison. Doris Vell stared at his own reflection in the observation glass and made himself a promise. In and out. Clean. Professional. No complications. Which was, of course, the single most dangerous thing a fleet commander in any civilization, anywhere in the known galaxy, could ever say. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system and went dark. Passive sensors only. The Undying Verdict slipped through space like a shadow, and Doris Vell watched the human planet grow slowly larger on the display, blue and white and entirely too cheerful-looking for a world full of creatures that had spent the last 100 years trying to blow themselves up. The crash site was transmitting a weak distress beacon on a frequency no human instrument could detect. 42 life signs. Weak but present. 42 Vorkai, alive on a pre-warp planet. Prepare 2 extraction shuttles, Doris Vell ordered. Small crew, we land 2 kilometers from the site, we move fast, and we are off that planet before their sun comes up. Sir. Navigator Fane Tar spoke up from the front of the bridge. I am reading human settlement approximately 8 kilometers from the crash site, small population, 112 individuals. That is fine. 8 kilometers is sufficient distance. Proceed. The shuttles launched at local nightfall. Doris Vell did not go himself. He remained on the undying verdict, monitoring the operation from the bridge, keeping his crest a professional flat blue and absolutely refusing to let himself feel anything as complicated as worry. The first shuttle landed without incident. The second shuttle landed without incident. The extraction team moved through the dark forest toward the beacon. Everything was going precisely according to plan, and then naturally it stopped. Commander? The extraction team leader, a capable officer named Soreth Mull, came over the comm with the kind of carefully controlled voice that meant something had gone very, very sideways. We have a situation. Define situation, Doris Vell said, in a tone that was the spoken equivalent of closing his eyes very slowly. We have reached the crash site. The survivors are present and alive. However, a pause. There is a human here. Doris Vell's crest went orange immediately, against his will. One human. Yes, sir? One, a female. She appears to be tending to our wounded. Complete silence on the bridge of the undying verdict. Every officer stopped moving. Every display seemed to hold its breath. Doris Vell said, very carefully, a human female has been tending to our wounded, for what we estimate is at least 6 of their days, sir. She has constructed a shelter around the crash site. She has been bringing food. She has cleaned and dressed several severe injuries using materials from our own medical kit that one of our crew apparently allowed her to access. Another pause. Sir, crew member Ali Svorn has learned approximately 40 human words and has been, according to her own account, holding conversations with this female for the last 3 days. Doris Vell pressed 2 of his 4 hands very firmly against the sides of his head. Her name, Soreth Mull continued, is Petra Wynn. She is a wilderness guide by profession. She found the crash site on the 4th day after impact. She did not report it to her government. She did not take recordings. She did not tell anyone. Why? Doris Vell said, each word measured and precise. Did she not report it? A longer pause. When Alice Vorn asked her that, sir, she apparently said. Soreth Mull stopped, started again. She said, you looked scared. I wasn't going to make it worse. The bridge of the undying verdict was very quiet for a long time. Doris Vell stood with his forearms folded against his chest, staring at the planet on the display, and something complicated happened inside him that his people did not quite have a word for. It was somewhere between confusion, respect, and the specific kind of discomfort that comes from having a belief you have held for 400 years quietly and politely dismantled by a single sentence. Get our people out, he said finally, and, get her out too. Sir? Soreth Mull's voice carried genuine shock. She kept 42 of my people alive, Soreth. She did it alone, in secret, because they looked scared. Doris Vell's crest shifted to a color that had no standard military designation. We are not leaving her on that planet to face whatever consequences come when someone eventually notices that cargo ship. Bring her aboard. She is under the protection of the undying verdict. Sir, the Compact's non-interference protocol strictly prohibits. I am aware of what the protocol says. Doris Vell turned to look directly at his navigation officer. Log it as a medical necessity. She is a witness to a Compact security incident and a provider of emergency care to Compact citizens. That is my ruling. Document it exactly that way. A pause. Yes, Commander. And Soreth? A beat. Be gentle about it. She saved 42 lives because they looked scared. I do not want the first thing she sees aboard this ship to be anything that makes her feel the same way. The comm clicked off. Doris Vell turned back to the observation glass and looked at the planet, small and blue and startlingly quiet from up here, and thought about a human woman who had stumbled across something impossible in the wilderness and responded by building it a shelter and bringing it food. His crest pulsed a long, slow, thoughtful green. He had been told for his entire career that humans were not ready, that they were too loud, too chaotic, too young, too violent, too irrational, too short-lived to warrant serious consideration by the galactic community. He had repeated it himself, more times than he could count. And yet, 42 lives. Alive, because one human female had looked at something terrifying and strange and injured, and her first thought had been, How do I help? The undying verdict waited in silence above the blue planet, and Doris Vell did what he had not done in 30 years of service. He changed his mind. Petra Wynne came aboard the undying verdict at session 300 local time, wrapped in her own jacket, carrying a small pack over one shoulder, looking at everything with enormous brown eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She was shorter than every single Vorkai on the ship by at least a head. She had one face, two eyes, two arms, and an expression of concentrated calm that Doris Vell recognized immediately as the face of someone who had decided, firmly and deliberately, not to panic. He met her at the landing bay. She looked at him. He looked at her. The translating device Alice Vorn had configured crackled softly between them. "You're the one in charge?" Petra Wynne asked. "I am," Doris Vell said. She nodded once, sharp and certain. "Okay. What happens now?" Doris Vell studied her for a moment. 42 of his people were alive because of the creature standing in front of him. She had done it without recognition, without reward, without even the expectation of survival, because someone had looked scared. "Now," he said carefully, "I figure out how to explain to the Galactic Compact that one of your kind just earned a debt we have no existing framework to repay." Petra Wynne looked at him steadily. "Start with coffee," she said. "I've been in those woods for 6 days." Doris Vell's crest flickered. His bridge crew, watching on the internal feed, later described the color as something they had never seen before, and had no official name for. The closest translation, according to the Compact's linguistic database, was something like, "the specific warmth of being surprised by something wonderful." The Galactic Compact had not convened an emergency session in 63 years. The last time had been when the Breathian Empire accidentally detonated a star in an inhabited system, and then, somehow, had the audacity to submit a damage claim to the Compact's insurance bureau. That session had lasted 9 days, produced 400 pages of resolutions, and ended with the Breathian ambassador being escorted out of the chamber by security after attempting to argue, with a straight face, that the inhabited system had technically been underperforming economically anyway. This session promised to be worse. Doris Vell stood in the center of the grand deliberation chamber on the Compact's neutral station, Tierenhold, with his forearms folded and his crest locked at a disciplined, immovable flat blue. Around him, arranged in 7 curving tiers, sat representatives of 41 civilizations, every one of them staring down at him with expressions ranging from outrage to disbelief to the very specific look of a diplomat who had been dragged out of sleep at an unreasonable hour and was making absolutely no effort to hide it. Grand Arbiter Senvao of the Compact's High Council sat at the apex of the chamber, her 6-limbed frame perfectly still, her 4 silver eyes fixed on Doris Vell, with the patience of someone who had been mediating galactic disputes for 2 centuries, and had long since stopped being surprised by what soldiers did when left unsupervised. "Fleet Commander Doris Vell of the Vorkai 7th Expeditionary Force," she began, and her voice carried the chamber the way gravity carries a falling object, completely, and without effort. "You are here to answer a formal inquiry into your decision to make direct contact with, and subsequently extract from her native planet, a pre-warp human female designated in your own report as," she glanced down at the document, "Petra Wynne, a wilderness guide from the geographic region known as British Columbia." "That is correct, Grand Arbiter. You did this in direct violation of the non-interference protocol of the Galactic Compact, which you have spent 30 years of your career enforcing." "Also correct." The murmur that ran through the tiers was not quiet. The Thelvan ambassador, a creature resembling a stack of iridescent plates stacked on top of each other, rattled loudly enough to be heard 3 rows back. The Murai delegate, who communicated through color shifts in their translucent skin, turned a shade of deep red that the translating system helpfully identified as institutionally offended. Grand Arbiter Senvao raised one limb, and the chamber fell silent. "Commander," she said, and now her voice was not performing for the room. It was speaking to him directly. "Explain your reasoning." Doris Vell had prepared a legal argument. He had spent the entire transit from Earth to Tierenhold working on it with his communications officer, building a case from Compact Regulation 7 Alpha, which covered emergency medical extractions, and Subclause 19 of the Non-Interference Protocol, which granted field commanders discretionary authority in circumstances involving significant and unforeseeable moral obligation. He had the argument ready. It was good. His communications officer had called it airtight. He did not use it. 42 of my people were alive, Doris Vell said, because one human decided to help them. She did not know what they were. She did not know where they came from. She had never seen anything like them in her life. She found them injured and stranded and frightened, and she did not run. She did not call for her government. She did not take recordings to sell or share. She built them a shelter, brought them food from her own supplies, cleaned their wounds, and learned 40 words of a language she had never heard before, so that the most frightened among my crew would feel less alone. He paused. She did all of this for 6 days, alone, in secret, with no expectation of reward, no certainty of survival, and no reason to do it beyond the fact that they needed help and she was there. The chamber was quiet in a different way now. Not the silence of outrage. The silence of attention. I left her on that planet, Doris Vell continued, and then I thought about what I was leaving her to. A world that did not know what she had witnessed. A government that would eventually find that crash site and ask her questions she could not answer without consequences. And I thought about the fact that the entire reason we have a non-interference protocol is because we believe humans are not ready to meet us. He looked up at the tiers, at 41 civilizations watching him. I would like someone in this chamber to explain to me what exactly Petra Wynne was not ready for, because from where I was standing she handled it considerably better than some compact member species handle routine diplomatic functions. The Thelvan ambassador rattled again. This time it sounded less like outrage and more like discomfort. Grand Arbiter Senevau was quiet for a long moment. You understand, she said, that this inquiry is not only about your violation of the protocol, it is about the precedent. If we allow this, the argument becomes, any human who accidentally encounters a compact species and responds with kindness has earned the right to be extracted and brought into the community. Yes, Doris Vell said. That is exactly the argument I am making. The chamber erupted. Petra Wynne, for her part, was sitting in a holding suite on Tyronhold that had been furnished, at Doris Vell's specific instruction, with a functioning heating unit, several blankets of varying thickness, and a beverage synthesizer that had been programmed, after considerable effort from Alice Vorn, to produce something acceptably close to coffee. She was drinking her third cup and reading the briefing document that Alice Vorn had translated for her, working her way through the section on galactic compact governance with the same focused, unhurried attention she brought to reading topographical maps in the field. Alice Vorn sat across from her, watching the human with the slightly stunned expression she had worn since the night of the extraction, when Petra had climbed aboard the shuttle, looked at the interior of an alien spacecraft for the first time in her life, and said, "Huh, smaller than I expected." "You are not frightened," Alice Vorn said. It came out less like a statement and more like a question she had been holding on to for several days. Petra looked up from the document. "I'm terrified," she said pleasantly. "I'm just not going to let it run things." Alice Vorn processed this for a moment. "That is a very unusual approach. My mother called it functional panic. You feel all the fear, you just make it wait in line behind the useful stuff." Petra took a sip of her coffee. "What happens if the commander loses the inquiry? He will face formal censure, possible demotion, and you will be." Alice Vorn hesitated. "Returned," Petra said flatly. "The protocol requires." "I know what the protocol requires. I read it." Petra set down her cup and looked at Alice Vorn directly. "Can I speak at the inquiry?" The silence that followed was, by Vorkai standards, the equivalent of a loud crash. "You are a pre-warp species representative," Alice Vorn said carefully. "The chamber has no provision for." "There's a clause," Petra said, tapping the document, "in section 44 of the Compact Charter. Any individual whose rights are under direct deliberation may petition to address the Grand Arbiter. I'm the individual whose rights are under deliberation. I want to speak." Alice Vorn stared at her. "You read the entire Compact Charter," she said. "I had time," Petra said, "and I wanted to understand what I was walking into." She picked up her cup again. "Can you get me into that chamber or not?" The inquiry had been going for 4 hours when the chamber doors opened and Alice Vorn walked in, followed by a human woman carrying a cup of something hot and wearing an expression that the Compact's translation system classified, after a brief processing delay, as calm, prepared, and mildly irritated by bureaucracy. The noise level in the chamber rose sharply. Grand Arbiter Senvau raised a limb. Silence. She looked at Petra Wynne. Petra Wynne looked back at her, directly, without flinching, in the way of someone who had spent years navigating wilderness where direct, unafraid eye contact with large, dangerous things was a survival skill. "You are Petra Wynne," the Grand Arbiter said. "Yes," Petra said. "You are petitioning to address this chamber under Charter Section 44. "I am." Another wave of noise from the tiers. The Grand Arbiter let it run its course, then silenced it again. "You have read the Charter," she said, and it was not quite a question. "Cover to cover," Petra said. The appendices are dry, but the core framework is actually pretty well constructed. A beat. You have a translation error in subsection 12, paragraph 3. Obligation of care is rendered as obligation of management in the standard compact text. Thought you should know. Something moved behind the Grand Arbiter's 4 silver eyes. It might have been amusement, it was difficult to tell. Speak, Seni Vao said. Petra stepped forward into the center of the chamber, next to Doris Vell. He looked down at her. She glanced up at him briefly, and something passed between them that had no diplomatic classification but that every species in the room recognized anyway. Then she looked up at the tears. "I'm not here to argue about protocols," she said, and her voice was steady and clear and carried without effort. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a diplomat. I found a crashed ship in the woods and there were people in it who were hurt, so I helped them. That's it. That's the whole story." The chamber was very still. "I know what the protocol is for," Petra continued. "I read it. The idea is that a civilization that isn't ready for contact gets protected from it. That makes sense to me. You don't want to accidentally shatter someone's understanding of the universe before they have the tools to process it." She paused. "But I want to ask everyone in this room one question, not about Commander Vell's decision, about the protocol itself." The Grand Arbiter made no move to stop her. "If your answer to she helped 42 injured people because they needed help is we need to send her back and pretend it didn't happen, then what exactly are you protecting us from? Because from where I'm standing, the thing you're most worried about is us finding out that you exist. And we already know something is out there. We've been pointing telescopes at the sky and sending signals into the dark for over 100 years. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "We're not scared of the universe being big. We're scared of being alone in it." No one moved. "I'm not asking for anything complicated. I'm not asking you to land ships on the White House lawn or broadcast on every frequency. I am asking you to consider the possibility that a species that responds to the unknown by building it a shelter and bringing it food might be more ready than your 400-year-old protocol assumes." She stopped, picked up her coffee, took a sip. The grand deliberation chamber of the Galactic Compact, for the first time in recorded history, sat in complete silence for a full 30 seconds after a speaker finished addressing it. Then the Murai delegate shifted color. The translation system processed it slowly, as if struggling with the specific shade. The output read, "She has a point." The vote took 2 days. It was not unanimous. 7 delegations voted against, including the Thelvan, who rattled so vigorously during the final count that 2 of their plates fell off and had to be retrieved from the floor. The Breathian delegation abstained, which was, given their history, considered a win. But 34 civilizations voted in favor of the resolution of acknowledged contact, a document that had never existed before and had to be drafted entirely from scratch by 6 compact legal clerks who had not slept in 30 hours, and would later describe the experience as professionally unprecedented and personally catastrophic. Doris Vell was cleared of all charges. The non-interference protocol was formally placed under review, and a subcommittee was established for the first time in the Compact's history to develop a framework for graduated contact with pre-warp civilizations that demonstrated, by the Compact's own definition of the term, sufficient moral readiness. The criteria for sufficient moral readiness were debated for several hours before the subcommittee chair, a meticulous Valorian named Thas Oran, finally proposed a working definition. It was accepted unanimously with no further debate because it was so self-evident that arguing against it would have felt embarrassing. The definition read, "A species demonstrates sufficient moral readiness when its members respond to the unfamiliar and the frightened with care rather than exploitation, without expectation of recognition, reward, or reciprocal benefit." Alice Vorn, reading the definition aloud to Petra from across the holding suite, paused when she finished. Petra was quiet for a moment. "That's just called being decent," she said. "Yes," Alice Vorn said. "It is. And you would be surprised how rare it is." 3 months after the resolution of acknowledged contact was ratified, the first official compact vessel entered Earth's solar system with its transponder active. It did not land. Not yet. That would come later, through proper channels, through the graduated framework that Thas Oran's subcommittee had spent 12 weeks constructing with exhaustive, almost painful care. But it sent a signal, on a frequency Earth's instruments could detect. Clear, simple, unmistakable. "Hello. We are here. We have been here. We are sorry it took us so long." The signal was received by 17 different Earth observatories simultaneously. Within 6 hours, it was the only thing anyone on the planet was talking about. Within 12 hours, every government on Earth had convened emergency sessions. Within 24 hours, the first coordinated human response was being drafted. It was by every account from the compact observers monitoring the situation from a careful distance, loud, complicated, messy, extraordinarily human. There were people who were terrified, people who were furious, people who were in tears, people who immediately started making plans, writing papers, recording videos, calling their families, looking up at the sky with expressions the compact's cultural analysts described as difficult to categorize but unmistakably significant. Doris Vell watched the reports from the bridge of the undying verdict, anchored at the edge of the solar system, his crest cycling slowly through colors he had not used in years. "They are taking it well," Prestoll said, cautiously. "They are taking it loudly," Doris Vell said. "That is not the same thing." A pause. "But yes, they are taking it well," his comm chimed. He opened it. Petra Wynn's voice came through, patched from the compact's temporary Earth liaison office that had been established, quietly, in a government building in Geneva. She had been there for 3 weeks, the first human ever to serve in an official capacity with the compact, working as a cultural liaison because Thas Oren had argued, with considerable passion, that the most qualified person to explain humans to the compact and the compact to humans was the one who had already done it under the worst possible circumstances and come out the other side drinking coffee. "Commander," she said. "Wynn," he said, "how does it look from up there?" Doris Vell looked at the planet. Blue, white, impossibly cheerful for a world this complicated. "Like something that was always going to happen," he said. "And like we should have started sooner." A pause. He could hear faintly the noise of the world behind her. All that wonderful, exhausting, irrepressible human noise. "They're scared," she said quietly. "I know. So was your crew," she said. "It didn't stop them from being worth helping." Doris Vell's crest went that color again, the one with no official name. The translation database still had not settled on a word for it. "No," he said, "it did not." He closed the comm and looked at the planet for a long time. 42 lives, because one woman had looked at the frightened and the unknown and decided that was not a reason to walk away. 400 years of silence, ended, not by a fleet, not by a weapon, not by any grand political negotiation or carefully staged first contact protocol, by a wilderness guide with a coffee habit and the stubborn, unremarkable, galaxy-shaking conviction that scared things deserve kindness. The undying verdict held its position at the edge of the solar system and waited, and the blue planet turned slowly in the dark, loud and alive, and finally not alone.